kind of falls in line with the same kind of thing. Neither one are cults. There are too many followers for it to be a cult at this point, and there's too many different sects and variations. Now, there are variations of Islam that I look at and see as evil. To me, they are to Islam what Satanism is to Christianity. It's the evil offshoot. And Satanism isn't the only evil offshoot of Christianity. I mean, look at, now this doesn't go for the whole Baptist sect, but the Westboro Baptist sect, whose leadership, by the way, were all registered Democrats. They're all extremely racist, all extremely homophobic, and in fact have called for the death of U.S. soldiers simply because of the don't ask, don't tell policy. They thought that every IED was a good thing because it killed a U.S. soldier, because of the political position that was thrust upon the soldiers, whether they liked it or not, and their opinion doesn't matter, especially now, but because the politicians pushed and passed don't ask, don't tell, they wanted U.S. soldiers killed by IEDs. They had nothing to do with us fighting wars against tyranny and against evil oppressors. And that's the thing. Islam itself may be a decent religion. Sure, there's things in it that contradict its own dogma, and its own leaders contradict each other, saying, no, this means this, no, this means that. You have the same thing with variances in different sects of Christianity. So, not seeing a huge difference there. Probably have the same thing within Buddhism. I don't know, I haven't gotten involved in any of the debates. Same with other religions. I know for a fact that different people have different views within the religion, although they agree on the overarching precepts and tenets. So, with that in mind, there are extremists within Islam who are willing to do violence in the name of their perversion, their heresy of that religion. So I'm not anti-Islam. I'm anti-terrorist extremist theocrat. And I don't care what religion the terrorist extremist theocrat ascribes to. If you're a terrorist extremist theocrat who's going to try to force me to believe what you believe, well, you're going to have a fight on your hands. Period. Now going back into shedding light on our wonderful government. Speaking about this whole deal going on with ISIS and the recent strikes, which, by the way, they hit a bunch of the oil fields hoping to cut off the money. Of course, that's going to cut off some of the funding, but it's not their only source of revenue. That's where the problem is going to lie. But they bombed a bunch of the oil fields that ISIS had taken over and was getting the revenue from. Now, there are some that they had taken over in Iraq, and back when we were there, the U.S. Army and the Marines, of course, we were able to, every time ISIS started to infiltrate some of these oil fields or sections of the oil company were started to go in and tap the pipeline and steal the crude on the unprocessed pipeline, because there's two pipelines. There's the raw and then there's the processed. And they kind of go back and forth from the processing plant and then back over to distribution centers. Anyway, we would catch them going and doing the tapping, and sometimes it was just organized crime, sometimes it was ISIS. Sometimes organized crime who was going to sell it to ISIS, who was then going to resell it. So we caught them, and every time we saw it, we helped the Iraqis do something about it if we didn't do something ourselves. We didn't just destroy the oil fields. Now, most of the oil fields they're striking are in Syria, not a big deal. But if we had destroyed the ones in Iraq, then that would have been dumb, because while we would have denied ISIS the access to them, we also would have denied Iraq the access. Iraq not having access to its oil would mean that it would have no access to building its economy, no way to generate revenues in order to support them funding and equipping and paying the payrolls, etc., their own armed forces in order for them to protect themselves. So it was really counterproductive and counter to our mission there had we gone in. Bob knows things. Well, here you have Obama going through and bombing them, both in Syria, and some of them are right on the border. I'm sure some of the incursions have gone across the border too, into Iraq and hit some of the oil fields there. Really, really dumb, especially when you're talking about the oil fields in Iraq, because all you're doing is further dismantling all the work, all the blood, sweat, and tears that U.S. service members have put into freeing that country from the tyranny of Saddam and then trying to help it build up. And you can already see that our pullout, our premature pullout, what that's led to. But, yeah. But we have all that going on. And what's Congress? What are they doing about it? Well, they're about to they just came back into session. They're about to go back on recess again because it's pushing into the election time. November 4th is coming fast, so they're all going to take another break here so that they can go and concentrate on the campaigns that matter. Instead of doing the job they're supposed to do, they're going to go worry about keeping their job, which they're not doing because they're too worried about keeping their job to do their job. But they're not in any hurry to really grant any major authorization, any major funding bills, etc., 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 regarding the what Obama's doing about the ISIS and Khorasan and Al-Qaeda issues in the Middle East. And their reasoning for not being motivated to do anything are kind of dual-sided. It kind of depends on which congressman or senator you talk to. Now, rollcall.com, if you go over to www.3blogs.rollcall.com, there's a good article there that says Obama hasn't requested ISIS war authorization. Pelosi, he doesn't need one, is the URL. Of course, I have it in the program notes if you're listening to the podcast. Well, depending on which side of the aisle and who you talk to, some say he doesn't need any further authorization. The War Powers Act, it covers him for now, so there's no big rush. Others say that this isn't a direct act of war, and we're not putting any boots on the ground. We're just flying planes overhead, and each one of those planes is a separate. Each one of those sorties is a separate mission. So that's less. They take only a couple of hours, much less, not 60 days. So Obama doesn't need any special authorization. You don't need a declaration of war. Others say we already declared a war on terror, and that declaration of war hasn't expired yet. It may or may have. That's something I'd have to go back and check on. But others say that the latest NDAA covers it. Some say that they have an NDAA in the works. Well, the last one hasn't expired yet. This next one will take care of it. All kinds of different excuses for not needing a full authorization for war. And some of them you really have. There's at least one in there that you have to sit back and kind of agree with, depending on who you are. I tend to agree with we have a declared war on terror, which makes me turn around and say, why the heck have we not put the boots on the ground yet? Why are we not back in Iraq yet? Just because Obama pulled out. Then again, he did make the mistake of officially declaring that front of the war over. That front of the war on terror concluded. Which, according to the authorization, the declaration of war, and the writ of attainder, according to all those, as soon as the president had stated that it's done, all of our operations have ceased and we're withdrawing, it is going to require a congressional reauthorization. However, the overall global war on terror has not been concluded and probably will not be for a good long time. Folks, you need to dig in, be vigilant, and be prepared to fight. As soon as you get complacent, as soon as you think, everything's fine, this enemy hasn't done anything for a while, that's when they strike, and they strike hard, and they strike bad, because we're not looking for it to expect it. So Congress, like I said, they're too busy worrying about keeping their job right now to be doing their job, and they need to be doing their job. That's just my 2 cents. If they're not willing to stick it out and do their job, maybe it's time to put somebody else in that office. Somebody who is willing. And that's both sides of the aisle and both houses of the legislature. Now, speaking about corrupt individuals, we're going to do our little dumb criminals segment, which we haven't done in quite a while. But here you go, folks. Also, back to going over to BuzzPro again, there's a great story up there about a greedy New York cop. Okay, before I get into this, folks, let's explain greed a little bit. Folks, if, say, I worked some kind of a job or a contract or a task or something on a contract and got paid $100,000 after my taxes, my legal, income taxes. I had $100,000 left over. How much of that belongs to somebody else? None of it, right? Even you could even argue that those taxes kind of really didn't belong to anybody else either. That $100K, by the contract, is mine. I earned it. I did whatever I did to get it. So, how much is somebody else's fair share? None. It's mine. My paycheck. Right? So, is it greedy of me to hold on to my paycheck? No. Now, if my brother were to do something, and he were to design something or whatever, and through the sale of a patent or the job he did or report he did up or whatever, and he got his little $100K paycheck after taxes and Social Security and all that stuff, that is, how much of his paycheck do I have a right to ask for? Zero. Now, if I go and knock on his door and say, hey, you got that $100K, that $100,000 paycheck, buddy, can you give me my fair share of 10% of what you just earned? Who's the greedy one? Me, at that point, asking him for part of what he earned, thinking that I have a right to what he earned, to a portion of his life that he spent earning that, to a portion of his pursuit of happiness and his property, which he dutifully earned. That I somehow have that inherent right, just because he's my brother, or just because I'm a human being, or just we're both citizens of the same country, that I have a right to what he earned. That is what greed is, folks. Greed is when you want something without earning it. You think you're just entitled to it. And you have all these people screaming about fair share. Well, if you're screaming fair share to somebody who earned something and you haven't, then you're the greedy one, not the person who's holding on to what they earned. Sorry. But somebody lied to you when they explained the definition of greed, because that's what greed is. Greed is grabbing at, thinking that you're entitled to, thinking that you can claim ownership of something that you did not earn and you did not legally own. Greed is very, very strongly tied to envy. So there you have it, folks. Well, you have a greedy New York cop who thought he was entitled to something that wasn't his, and started stealing what wasn't his. He was a cop. He was a parking cop, and his responsibility was to go out and empty the parking meters and bring the change in and turn it in and into the revenue office, etc., etc. And that was his job one of his jobs as a cop, was one of his duties. Well, over the course of 5 years, he skimmed $89,000 in quarters. A quarter at a time, $89,000 in quarters from New York City. Now, he just got convicted of the crime. So, of course, he's going to be going to jail. And interesting story there. I think Steve Ale wrote it up, but not entirely sure. You can go on over to buzzpo.com and read up on that article. It's a good and somewhat humorous article, but it's a true story, folks. New York City cop, he's so squeaky clean, he was stealing quarters out of the parking meters. Yeah, by the way, he got caught when somebody had thought they saw him doing something not so copacetic and reported him, so Internal Affairs started watching him, and they caught him going with a large amount of quarters to make a deposit at his bank. So, yeah. So not only was he greedy and stole that amount of money, he was kind of dumb in the process, but shouldn't have done it in the first place. That's the thing about criminals. They don't understand that eventually you are going to get caught, so they're too dumb to just avoid doing the crime in the first place. That would be the easy way would be to not do the criminal act. Although the criminal act looks like it might be the easy, quick way of doing whatever, in the long run, it ain't. It's a lot more difficult. Unless you like being in jail. Now I want to talk about other crazy criminals out there, kooky criminals, and this leads right into to Second Amendment type items. Well, you know what, folks? Let's hold on to that thought for just a second. Well, you know, yeah, well, we already brought it up. I'll talk about it. Yeah. Yep, you're right. You're reminded, hey, you brought it up. I didn't like do a segue of, hey, this is coming up, folks. I said, this is what we're going to talk about now, folks. But real quick, if you have something you'd like to talk about again, please call in. Our number here is 520-226-8567. Again, our call-in number, if you want to be live on the air, is 520-226-8567. Now, we had a criminal. You know, I looked at the story from a couple different angles, but it escapes me of exactly. Here it is. It was in Jacksonville, Florida. In fact, the address was 556. That's like like the other thing of 223 caliber, otherwise known as 5.56 millimeter. Same size of round that is fired by an M16 or an M4. Anyway, at 556 Marsh Landing Parkway, there's a Gamestop. Now, many of you may not recall, so let me remind you. Good old moms demand lack of common sense in America. Moms demand gun confiscations and infringement upon the Second Amendment in America, or whatever that National Socialist, fascist, anti-American, communist individual Shannon Watts, whatever she's calling her current group that's funded by her lover, her boyfriend, Mike Bloomberg, whatever the name of her current organization is. They've not sat, but they've gone through great pains to harass private businesses into either flat out putting what we call 30-06 signs, the signs that legally state this is private property and I don't want your firearms here for whatever reason, to post those actual signs right next to their entrances and exits on the exterior of the building per law. Some have gone so far as to do that. Other ones just put up their little sign that says we don't like weapons here, although it doesn't legally meet the criteria. So if you still carried and if you had a concealed handgun license and you were able to legally carry into these places, all they could do when you got there is they could kindly ask you to leave because they don't have the proper signage by law to prohibit you from bringing it in there. Although it is private property, and if they ask you please leave, the right thing to do